So guys, in our last video, we saw how we can define middlewares using hooks in Flask, how we can chain these middlewares. So in this video, we will see how we can define these middlewares using WSGI configuration. But before that, let's go through and understand what is WSGI, how it works, what's its relevance when we are using Flask framework. Where does it apply? Okay, so WGI is nothing, it's called as a web server gateway interface, and it provides interface for external web servers to communicate with our Flask application. So because it says interface, that means using this interface, external web servers, they're able to make a request to our application. They are able to understand these requests. Okay, so all the rules or how it happens internally, that is defined in this interface itself. But apart from that, so right now, if you see, we are starting our application using the development server, but it doesn't happen in the production case. In our production, we start our application by Flask, whether it's a Flask application or a Fast API application. We started using some WSGI application server, which can be a Gunicon, which can be a UVCon. So that's where this type of middleware comes into picture. So when we define a WSGI based middleware, so it's able to properly work with external web servers which are routing our requests. So continuing our WSGI, as you can see, I have renamed the previous module to middleware hooks, and now we will define our new module. I will just name it middlewares. So this will be the module we will be using now, and here we will define our new WSGI based class. So I will just name WSGI middleware. So as you can see, this middleware, it will have a init, which is a constructor, and then it will have one more method which is named as call. So this call is actually an entry point to WSGI based middlewares. So anytime when you see this call being defined on a middleware, just understand that this is in WSGI based. Let me correct the name. And now all the new classes that we are going to define, like the log middleware or the request middleware we used previously, they all will be inheriting from this class only. Okay, and we will customize this class a little bit so that it supports our before and after hook methods. So now I will just remove this init constructor from this. We don't need this anymore. I will just define an after method, and then I will define. As you can see, this after will have the response. It will simply return the response, and this before has an environment sort of parameter. This environment contains all the information related to request, like request status, request headers, or any additional metadata that the request will be having. I will further customize this after and before method. So for the before method, I will simply return the pass here. So I will just keep it as a template method, which will be overridden in our subsequent child classes. For the after, however, I will modify the parameter which we are passing, and I will just write status headers, and I will just pass the response as well. Then I will return the same. I will just return status headers and response. Now we will modify our main entry point method. So I will, as you can see my solution, I will just write self.before. So what this line does here is when calling the entry point, which is basically our request hitting our server. So it will first call the before hook or the before method that we have defined, and then whatever actions we want to perform, we can do it afterwards. Okay, so there are two things here. So we can define the actions we want to perform on the before method itself when we are overriding it in the child classes. I will show you guys in detail what I mean to say. So, but for now, let's proceed with our definition. So I will just call this method here, and then I will call the self.app. So this self.app is nothing that basically it will proceed with the request here. This method, just understand that it is handling the request on the app level. So this self.app will pass the environment details to that request, and it will get the response. So this start response is it's nothing but the response that the app has returned. Okay, So the ideal response, when the request comes on the application, it will simply respond with whatever definition we have given on the controller function, whether we are returning a 200 or 300 status code. And here we are handling the status headers and response. Okay, we will just customize this slightly more. I will just define a dictionary here for the status holder, and I will just declare this as a dictionary, and then I will define one more dictionary which I will name it as a headers holder, and then I will create a list and name it as response holder. So these three dictionaries will hold each metadata, like the status, headers, and the response. And from here, I will just return it as a single object. It will be iterator basically. So I will name it response. And now I will iterate to this response, and I will simply append to this response holder. So which means, so basically, all of the response items, they will be stored in the response holder array. Okay. And now here, instead of passing the start response directly to the self app, we'll create a custom wrapper around this. So we'll just define a function inside of our call and write it like custom start response. So this will take the status and headers basically. So this is more like a callable function which will be passed to the self.app. And this header, status and header will be passed by the self app itself. Here, the purpose we are defining this is just to populate our two dictionaries. One is the status holder and the header holder, as you can see. So here I will just say, headers, and I will just add the headers here. And at the end, again, here we will just write a lambda function, and I will just write X, and this lambda function, we will just append our response and X to this. So we are appending all of the remaining data that is being processed by this custom response function and populating our two dictionaries. Now this custom response will pass to this. Okay, so now when the self.app will be called, it will trigger this callable. Basically, it will call this customized response function instead of its own start response. We'll be using the start response now. So after that, now you can see we have again iterated through our response. That is because we are we are appending whatever is left, like these status holders and headers holders. We are appending those details as well in our response holder array. So now we will just call our start response, and this start response, it takes the parameter like status and headers. We will call that, and it will return us the data finally, and this data will be returning at the end. And now we can call our self.after function, and this self.after function, it will take our status and headers in the response, and it will return us the same thing, the status, headers, and the body. If you see, it's coming from the definition itself. It is returning as status, header, and the response. So this will be the customized function, which we will call inside our middleware classes. So that means here we will have our app processing our response, which will be the default response. And then if we want to override that response that is being processed by the application, like if we want to append new headers, or we want to append some extra information like we did in the previous example in case of hooks, we can do that here. I mean, that logic is being handled here. We just have to simply override the after method in our child classes, custom middleware. So, and now we can just simply call the start response, pass it the headers, and at the end just return the body. So just a quick recap. We defined our call method, where we will call our before hook first, and then we define a couple of the data dictionaries which will hold our status, headers, and the response. And we also defined our custom start response, which will populate over these dictionaries. And at the end, we are initializing our app, handling the call from the application level, and then we are calling our after hook. We missed one small change here. We have to add a constructor which will initialize our self.app attribute. This is a class attribute, and this constructor will take a parameter which will be the app itself. So we forgot this, so I have added this. Now let's go and define our first custom middleware class. So I will define a request middleware. We'll just use this request middleware and then define a before hook on this. Let me write this, use the type end. So it has a before method which will override our base class's before method. And then it will simply log in our request method and the path info. So these two will be using. And also I will define one more method which I will name as apply middlewares. So this apply middleware will do nothing. It will take the list of middlewares that we have and it will apply each of the middleware into our application. Let me fix this. Okay, so now we can apply this, but before that, let me use the reversed here. So I will apply middlewares in the reversed order. Now, having defined this, we will go back to our init.py. Let's go back, and here we will simply comment out the previous imports we were using, since we will use the newer version of middlewares. So I will import it from the middleware instead of middleware hooks, and I will write request middleware. Okay, and here I will remove this one. Just define a simple list which will contain this middleware. So this is my request middleware. Now I will use app.wsgi. So this attribute WSGI, this is the attribute which we have to initialize with our middleware classes. Okay, so if we want, we can directly initialize it with the request middleware, or since we are planning to chain our middlewares with multiple type of these custom classes, I will simply pass this middleware list to it. So what I will do is I will use the function that we define, apply middleware. So I will use that function here, and I will pass the app.wsgi and then the middleware list. So now, if you want to apply more middlewares, you simply have to add those middlewares here like this, and then it will start applying them in a sequence or chain. Now, having defined our custom WSGI base class and then our custom middleware, which is the request middleware, we'll just try to test it out. So let's start our server. So after starting it, let's go ahead and just make one git call. I'll check code here. And straight away you can see the print statement. We are printing the request type, the login request here, and it can be shown in our std out. So this is the request middleware in place. So similarly, we can define one more middleware class, and we can name it authorization middleware. Now what this authorization middleware does is it will simply check our authorization header, and if that header is not present, it will return or intercept the request and simply return the response like 401, which we did previously. So I will just follow the type end. The issue with this type end is that it is not actually correct, so we won't be handled this way. So I mean, clearly we have to check for this header to be present inside this dictionary, but this is not the way we return the response. So what we have to do is we have to return a WSGI-based response, which this middleware can understand and intercept. So what we can do is we will simply return a response type object from this Wizard wrappers, and then inside of this, we will define a function. So I will simply say if there are no headers present, then I will define a function and I will name it WSGI response. And this function will be returning as the response type object which we defined on the top, the class that we defined on the top. Now this response type object, we will simply return this from here, and at the end we will simply return this wrapper. This is it. So we're calling this response at the end of the function call. So that means when we are calling this function, it will simply return us the response, and then we are returning this function simply. Now we'll go back to our base middleware class, and here we will intercept this self before, because every time when this class is called, any custom class is called, it also calls for base class, and it will call this dot before hook, self before hook, if it is defined in our side class, which in our case it is. So I will just simply name it early response here, and the only check we have to do is we have to check if this early response is callable. If it is, then we will simply return. Then we are going to return this response. So what this means is, this means if your custom middleware, whatever middleware you have defined, in our case, our authorization middleware, if it is checking for any parameter or any header value, and based on that, it is returning or it is intercepting this request, then this logic will follow. Then our base class will be able to handle that. Otherwise, if we don't do this here, even though we are returning the WSGI-based response from our custom, our class won't be able to handle it. So in short, it won't be able to return that 401 we are looking for. Now, if we go back, let us go inside our in.py file now, and we try to import this. And now we will simply put it in the chain or the list. We will uncomment this section. Now, if you go back and if you make a call, you can see straight away it's giving us an error saying that there's an authorization header missing, which it is in our case. So just to test things out, I will go to the authorization section and I will add the bearer. I will add any sample bearer here, so I will just move it forward. So you can see now it's passing. It's able to proceed from that. So this check is passing, so it's not returning any response. That means it's able to go in our base class and look for the other options and then return the response, final response. Okay, so this way, guys, we are able to define our two custom middlewares using the WSGI-based approach. And now finally, we will define our last custom middleware, and we will name it actually custom middleware. So this custom middleware will just append some fields to our response object. So I will simply follow the type end, and here I will import our UUID field. Okay, so what this middleware will do is it will simply append content type response ID, which will be the UUID, and the app version to our response object. So in our response, we will have these headers present. Now I will go in our init.py file, and I will import this new middleware. And here I will simply come in. Now we will have three middlewares in chain, and I will go back to our postman and I will call. So you can see that we have these 4 fields present now in our response. And if you want, you can just go back. Instead, let me just add one different, so this will just print the number of characters in the content length. So let's go. Okay, so it's saying the content length is already there. I will just name it 2. So you can see now we have like 2 content lengths. Okay, so I think this content length that we have added, it's not correct because the way it's counting the characters. But nevertheless, just for the example, this will work. And now you guys can see that how we can add additional headers to our response. So guys, in our next video, we will see how we can define or integrate new tools in our application, how we can use worker libraries like Celery, or how we can change the folder structure and make our application more aligned with the MVC-based setup or MVC-based architecture. Thank you for watching.